From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again. Welcome to the show. So, my block on the north side is changing in a pretty ugly way thanks to some incredibly successful invasive species. Forestry crews were out there cutting down 5 of the biggest trees on my block this week, and probably before the end of the year, most of the rest are going to be gone too. They're ash trees, of course, and tens of thousands of them have died in the last few years because of the emerald ash borer. It's just one small environmental issue that's having a huge impact on our quality of life. As we know, the ash borer is not the only invader. There are Asian carp and all manner of aquatic pests and rampant invasive plants that are choking out our forests. But there are also faster moving environmental issues, and we've had 2 of them in the news just lately. BP Amoco's Whiting refinery had what they said was just a little spill of oil into Lake Michigan that, guess what, turned out to be bigger than they initially said. And we still have to find those what's going on with those massive piles of petroleum coke that are piling up on the southeast side, despite the city's claim that it wanted to legislate them away. But something happened along the way. So on today's show, 3 people who know a lot about Chicago's natural and built environment. Michael Hawthorne and Kari Lydersen have been writing about the petcoke mess for a couple of months now. Michael is here, the environment reporter for the Chicago Tribune. Glad to have you back.
Glad to be here.
It's your second time here, so now you have life membership in Chicago News.
I hope I get the mug this time.
Take it. You can take one. Also, of course, Kari Lydersen is here. Kari is a reporter and writer and author with a heavy emphasis on environmental issues. Her most recent book, Mayor 1%. We had her on the show to talk about that. Henderson is here. He's Midwest Director of Natural Resources Defense Council and founding commissioner of the Chicago Department of Environment way back there in 91, 92, something
91?
Like 20 years ago. And I had the pleasure of working for Henry as the press guy for that department all those years ago. That was a long time ago.
It was.
Anyway, so we are here today because we focus on a lot of other, sort of political and social and economic and educational things on the show, but we need to talk a little bit about what's going on in the environment. And here you are, folks who know about these things. The one that is clearly most in the news right now is this pile of black stuff that you've both written about, and we had a great show when you were here talking about it before. It looked like it was going to be a kind of a no-brainer. It shouldn't really be there. It was here because you said, Michael, that our environmental laws were more lax than Indiana's, and so that way it was easier to just move it a couple of miles and pile it up here. And also we're just going to get some legislation and we're going to take care of that and it's all going to go away. But it didn't happen that way.
I think what's interesting is that this, more than almost anything that I've written about in the city, sparked just an incredibly visceral reaction from politicians. Everybody was jumping over themselves. Mayor Emanuel, Attorney General Madigan, Congressman, Senator Durbin, everybody upset about these giant, dusty black piles.
I'm surprised
on the southeast
Obama
side.
didn't come in too.
He's about the only one that didn't.
Right.
So the mayor talked very tough, organized some television interviews back in February, where he, had a nice softball question and answer session, and he talked very tough about how he was going to drive these companies out of the city of Chicago. He was very clear about what he wanted to do. So then he introduced some rules that require these piles, if they want to stick around, spend a lot of money to enclose them. Okay, well, that's okay. Maybe that'll cut down on the dust. Then he also said we're going to go a step further. We're going to zone these things, and we're going to make sure that they don't expand, and we're not going to have new ones. The city was very clear about this. The mayor was very clear about this. Then the city council has a zoning committee meeting last week, and they present this little handy piece of paper called a substitute ordinance. And you read through there, I think of my days back in Springfield, covering the legislature, and one of my mentors down there, Charlie Wheeler from the Sun-Times, always said, make sure you read the bill. And this is another example of Alderman Pope getting up and talking about this is the toughest petcoke regulations in the country. Then you read the fine print. Oh, by the way, if you burn it in the city of Chicago, you can keep storing it in the city of Chicago. So essentially a giant loophole that you can drive one of these barges through full of petcoke, allowing any company that wants to burn petcoke instead of coal or both to store it on site, and not just on the southeast side, pretty much anywhere in these industrial areas of the city.
So this to me is big. This is a really big thing. I mean, we've all said, you've said, Kari, that burning petcoke is way messier, dirtier than even burning coal, right?
I mean, I suppose it depends. The gasification plant, if I understand right, the Leucadia plant that people are afraid will come back. I mean, Henry would probably know better, but my understanding is that, you know, the emissions from that wouldn't be as bad as the old coal plant, so it's complicated. But the thing is, if this sparks a new plant, this gasification plant that has been talked about in the past, or something else that's new, that's exactly what the people on the southeast side have been fighting against all this time.
I mean, to be clear, nobody's burning petcoke in Chicago now that we know of, right?
That we know of.
Right.
At least the Chamber of Commerce says they don't know of anyone. There is a plan on the table of Koch Brothers, the big concrete company, the red and white trucks that you see all over the city. They have plans to build a new cement kiln on the southeast side. It's been permitted, and the permit explicitly allows them to burn petcoke along with coal.
So somebody wants to burn petcoke in Chicago, and that's why Alderman Pope was there to serve them.
Apparently so, and Koch Brothers and their subsidiary called Universal Concrete, they say they had nothing to do with it, nothing to see here. Nobody is willing to take ownership of this particular substitute ordinance. But the interesting thing of it is once people showed up at the hearing last week, and slowly started listening to what the alderman was saying, and a few people managed to get in and ask some questions. You know, there's a noted political gadfly who shows up at a lot of these meetings, George Blakemore, and it's like somebody said, you know, every now and then George Blakemore's right, and Mr. Blakemore got in there and said, you're being hoodwinked at the 11th hour. And that's essentially what everybody who was at that meeting ended up walking away feeling. Alderman Pope was actually forced to pull back, and they're going to now discuss this again in April, later this month. So it'll be interesting to see if we get this substitute ordinance again or something different. Right now, nobody's talking.
One thing that's curious too, it just makes you wonder what was happening before this all blew up in August, when one resident had a video of one particularly windy day where there was black clouds going over the neighborhood, and you know, it all took off politically after that, but this stuff had been building up over the course of at least some months or a year. So it makes you wonder, you know, one, did the authorities know about that and just not care, and it was all, you know, somewhat of a show once they became so upset? Or did they not know, which is equally disturbing? And, you know, if so, I mean, it's possible to just build 10-story high piles of waste without anyone from the city or the state keeping tabs on it. I don't know.
Well, the state actually knew very well and permitted these facilities without bothering to have public hearings about it, and actually permitted one of the sites to have 11 million tons of it, which is a huge amount of material, which would fundamentally transform the nature of the southeast side, which has been repeatedly attempted. I think putting it in a context of the last 30 years of repeated efforts to transform southeast side of Chicago into a gigantic waste facility and a sacrifice zone. Waste management wanting to drain all of the existing marshes in the area and turn them into landfills. Land and lakes expanding dramatically without appropriate zoning. The landfill after landfill, and then proposal of gigantic incinerators, which would go on the southeast side, as the target for waste management within the region. And community has repeatedly fought those things and stopped them. Harold Washington was forced to put a moratorium on new and expanded waste facilities in the area, which is really kind of what the model of this ordinance was supposed to be. You know, the city was, well, maybe we'll put some regulations on from the health department on covering them, and pointing out that, in fact, you have a precedent of stopping the ruination of this community through a moratorium on new and expanded facilities, led to the ordinance that was supposed to be heard last week. And the mayor's statements to the effect referred back to that reality of the power that the city has to regulate through zoning to stop the despoilation of the neighborhood. And then this surprise happens, which is what one comes to expect in terms of what goes on the southeast side, that this is an area that can be dumped on. This is an area that the community can be ignored. And frankly, it's time for that to stop.
But, I mean, let's talk politics here. So Alderman Pope was okay with this? He was okay with making this change?
The indications of having introduced an ordinance like this indicates that he was probably okay with it. Yeah,
Well,
by definition, it's okay with it.
So, I mean, is Alderman Pope due for condemnation for this? Did he do a bad thing?
Well, I think it is a betrayal of what has been discussed. The language that Michael refers to in terms of introducing the change, which is, this is very tough. We cannot have the despoilation of this community. The people deserve to be protected, which is why I am stripping away the protections, is not merely incoherent. It's carrying water for fossil fuel industry that will end up with a problem.
But excuse me just one second. We've all been around a while. You don't get something like this. You don't just get one alderman to strip this protection out.
This is not the alderman. This is the mayor's office.
Right.
And they
this
acknowledge
is the
that.
city.
This is the city. This is their ordinance. This is their substitute ordinance. They did this. Alderman Pope is just carrying the water for him at the zoning committee.
Because it's his ward.
And it's like anything else in the city. You know, really nothing happens unless the mayor wants it to happen, right? It's the same thing that happened under Daley. So
you either have to believe that the mayor is in control of everything or he's not, and he would have you believe he's in control of everything.
That's
and
what
lots of people
he
would
sure seems to
agree with
indicate that on a regular basis. And I think people on the southeast side feel that usually when there's a press conference on the southeast side, it's the governor, it's the mayor talking about the new southeast side,
Right.
opening up these environmental centers, turning the landfills into nature areas. There's been a lot of talk, especially in the last 5-10 years, about that happening. But I think what we're seeing here is the reality of the old part of the neighborhood. Steel was made, chemicals were made in that part of the city for a long time, and a lot of that went away. And there's been talk about transformation, but some people would rather keep the old ways. There are certain business interests that see some of this vacant property. They see the port there, they see the rail lines there, and they see dollar signs. And so, you know, the Koch Brothers and other companies took advantage of long-standing existing piles. They see an investment there. The rest of us see waste. Certain companies see a business opportunity.
Well, I think there is a changing set of realities that are in part and in significant part due to the effective advocacy by the people who live there, who see a series of opportunities from the natural area where you have this Millennium Reserve. Instead of being destroyed and turned into gigantic landfills, this is a place to invest in terms of a range of restoring the community. You've got the Wisconsin Steel site, which has been remediated. What will happen with that? You've got to the north the U.S. Steel site with a proposal for 60,000 new homes and investment on transportation to connect that to the rest of the economy, and a transformation of the Port District. These are not individual actions. These are part of a systemic change. The problem we have with this ordinance amendment is that it goes back to propping the door open for further despoilation, as opposed to looking at connecting the dots of a transformation which calls for a vision of genuine renewal, as opposed to continued dumbing down and burdening this community. People actually live there. They're committed to the place. They're reinvesting in it. They have the right for a vision that's commensurate with their desires for rebuilding the community.
Well, and I think, Henry, you're right. In terms of connecting the dots, the other thing is, it goes back to, Ken, what you were talking about at the beginning of the show. To further connect the dots, this is all tied to BP. It's tied to the BP refinery in Whiting.
Right.
The Koch brothers signed up to buy this facility from DTE
We
Energy
should just
from
say,
Michigan.
we're talking the same Koch brothers, the famous Koch brothers, who are the funders and the
Charles and
the
David.
bête noire of the left right now. That's
intellectual
correct.
lead
Right.
of the Republican Party. Yeah. Okay.
So they're a company.
This is
One of
their
the companies
business.
they control bought this facility. They already owned a smaller facility at 100th Street in the river. They have an exclusive contract to take all the petroleum coke from the BP refinery in Whiting. They just finished an upgrade that will more than triple the amount of petroleum coke that's generated. We talked about this on the show the last time.
2 million tons a year.
But what is interesting about this is just another step in a larger transformation of that refinery, built by John D. Rockefeller. That this refinery is now almost exclusively Canadian tar sands oil.
Yeah.
And there are a number of consequences that go along with that. Henry's group and others have been fighting to make sure that the environmental regulations in place for that particular refinery are strong enough to protect the surrounding community and the entire Chicago area. That means our drinking water in Lake Michigan. It means the air that we breathe.
Part of the problem is it's in Indiana. And the Indiana view of the environment tends to be different.
But
than
it is
perhaps
part of
ours.
the United States, and there are these things called, the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, which actually do apply
Are
to
those
it.
still in effect? I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that when we talk about the laws here being more lax than there, part of that was there was a huge legal settlement. The federal government, Henry's group, and others got involved. So if you have that petroleum coke at the actual BP refinery in Whiting, you have to store it behind 50-foot high walls, and you can't keep it for very long because they just don't have the footprint. They don't have the space for it. That's why these trucks and these barges are taking it just a few miles across the state border to the southeast side, and that's what really upsets people. I mean,
Where the
I've been to a
environmental
few
laws are more
meetings.
welcoming.
I've been to a few meetings down there, and people are very, very angry about this. And you say, I think it's the same thing with this oil spill. You say BP, you say oil, you say spill, you say dust. People get very upset, even if the risk isn't as great as maybe other things that we're exposed to every day in that community. It's you can see it, and people don't like it.
You have to wonder what's really driving this ordinance and the city's motivation too, because if it's BP, I mean, I can't imagine that BP cares that much about where the petcoke goes. There's got to be, your group, pointed out all these other spots they can send the petcoke if it's not the southeast side. So as powerful as BP is, if it's not all that important to BP, is it this Leucadia coal gasification plant that wants to come back? Is it Ozinga? And if so, I mean, what kind of pull, is it that the mayor doesn't want to do something that's seen as anti-business in general? I mean, my understanding is that neither Ozinga or the gasification plant would really do that much for the city in terms of jobs and taxes. I mean, it would be something, but it seems like there's got to be, it seems kind of confounding what is really the deeper motivation for the city pressing for
There's
this.
something there.
Well, I don't think that there's an understanding of how this plant, the Leucadia plant, would actually affect the area. In order to
Explain what it is.
It is Leucadia is a company that does a range of things, and particularly it's focused on petcoke and turning it into a fuel. So it is a further use of the petcoke that turns it into a fuel stream. But as they repeatedly have tried to do in the state of Illinois, it is not profitable unless they get a 30-year subsidy, which requires purchase of it by the people of Illinois. So the people of Illinois would essentially be taxed to make this a viable operation, a 30-year tax. So one of if you're to be born this year. After you're out of college, you'd be free of paying that tax. And it makes no economic sense. It's the faulty economics of fossil fuel economy. What is a result of when you burn this is you have an intensely toxic waste. And the process of burning it releases a whole lot of other pollutants. So the fact that they're gasifying it doesn't remove that unless you have intense investment in dealing with the capturing these things and doing something with that. So you have basically a toxic waste manufacturing operation, and somehow it's seen as economically viable as opposed to corrupt economics.
Just in shorthand, this plant would take this would take, I understand, coal also, right, and this petcoke, and create a gas that would be essentially a synthetic natural gas. But it would be so expensive that the only way you could sell the stuff would be if you had legislation that forced people to buy it.
Well, it brings to mind, I mean, those of us who've been around for a while remember that we had a similar situation with the waste incinerators.
Yes.
And you know, I think at one point it was former Senator Peter Fitzgerald, when he was still in the state Senate, said, you know, the subsidies for those waste incinerators was something along the lines for the jobs that were created would be $300,000 a year per job. He said, why don't we just find 20 people on the street and give them $300,000 and shut these things down? And eventually the legislature did that. They took away those subsidies, and lo and behold, all the incinerators went away.
Which is what we found in the city of Chicago when we had an incinerator operating. The idea was it was economically competitive with landfilling. It was about $90 a ton more than landfilling, and so far from being an economic benefit, it was a subsidy to another activity. So this is kind of what we're faced with. And again, you go back to the solid waste issue. 1990, the laws of Chicago were so lax that what it did was sucked waste activities into the city to the burden of communities, as opposed to having any kind of attention to the fact that this is a burden on communities that needs to be properly managed. You have exactly the same thing happening with the fossil fuel industry.
I want to broaden the picture out just a little bit, because you know we've kind of talked a little bit about the BP and the tar sands and all that. All of this, the petcoke is a byproduct of refining this very heavy, cruddy stuff that they're mining in Canada and sending here for us to breathe while they process it, as I understand it. And
it's a pollution delivery system is what this is. And presently we have a pollution delivery system to the Great Lakes. BP is part of that. The BP Whiting facility, which was started by John Rockefeller in order to refine what was at that time known as skunk oil, because it was dirtier than what they were refining in Ohio. So they had to have this for a particularly dirty amount of oil that they were finding in Indiana. That was different from what they found elsewhere in the country. Now it's being retrofitted in order to a different kind of skunk oil, which delivers pollution to all of our communities. And this is the interesting thing, is with you're talking about the pipeline that will go to Houston. That is another way of delivering pollution in the United States, which will create further problems of the waste stream. But we've got it already, and this is the sort of thing which the president should be looking at when he's thinking about this pipeline. Is this in the national interest to create a burden of continuing and expanding waste through many, many, many different communities? This is the community where he began his public career.
Sure
there
is.
are people he sat across the table from. Was in their interest and fighting for their interests. You can see the impact of this dirty fossil fuel economy, the dirtiest fuel on earth, creating Canadian tar sands, creating a further dirty waste stream, fetching up in people's backyards and making it impossible to live where they want to live.
And we're talking about the local impacts too, but then if you get into the whole climate change issue, the petcoke is huge amounts of carbon dioxide. The whole thing with that Leucadia plant, part of their plan would be to actually, part of it depends on having pipelines built to transfer the carbon dioxide where it would supposedly be sequestered, and that isn't proven at all that would work. And even if the say this ordinance didn't pass, but they still kept storing the petcoke here, a lot of it's being shipped to China and then being burned in China. You know, the carbon dioxide is going to come out somewhere regardless.
So in order to get this oil that they call oil, I don't even know if you would even call that stuff oil, but in order to get oil, bitumen, in order to get the oil out of it, you have to transport it.
Well, you have to mix it with a diluent, in order to take it from being essentially like a rock into being the consistency of chunky peanut butter, which then it gets put into pipelines that have to be heated and pressurized. Our current
all of
pipeline,
which takes energy.
And our current pipeline regulations are for non-heated, non-pressurized, which is why we had that nice spill that Kari did such a good job on in Kalamazoo River, which has yet to be cleaned up.
And the other thing on the transportation, when they say the Bakken shale, where they're getting so much oil from fracking, another so-called non-traditional type of oil, they're taking
this
trees.
is North Dakota.
Yeah, North Dakota. Yeah. So where they don't have the pipeline infrastructure set up, they're transporting it by rail too, and that's where you get these disasters like Quebec. And
well, which leads me to the really big issue of globalization, and that all of this stuff sells on global markets. So that leads us kind of into fracking, because we are now fracking, I guess, in Illinois for natural gas, right?
They're doing some tests.
But let me just say that you have the oil piece and you have the natural gas piece, and we are being told every day that our natural gas prices are the lowest they've ever been because of this wonderful technology we have. But what I understand is that the only reason it's low, it's being artificially held low right now because they haven't yet built the liquefied natural gas terminals that they really want to build to get this stuff out of the United States so they can sell it in India and China, so that the prices will go back up to where they were. So we will have destroyed our aquifers, we will have done all kinds of environmental rapacious damage to get this stuff out of the ground so that we can sell it at the market price to anybody in the world, and we still end up paying what we were paying before.
So
Is that
you don't
unfair?
think that ExxonMobil, et
depressing.
cetera, are investing in this in order to make sure that the prices are kept low?
You know,
think they're trying to
I know that,
earn
and
more
I
on
know
their
that
investment?
that makes me sound
It's
like
shocking.
I'm just being negative, but yeah, I kind of believe that. Yeah.
I think your point is very important. There's a great deal of rhetoric out there that the fossil fuel industry is working hard to make us in the United States independent.
I've seen those ads. Yeah.
But what we're talking about is, how do you build the infrastructure to get this into other places in the world in order to earn more money, and that the United States becomes just a source or a pass-through.
Or
It's
a
the
refiner.
It's the colonization of the United States, basically, so that material is taken out of our environment, and the burden left here, and the profits generalized in a very different way in a global economy, which we are not necessarily recipients of.
And ironically, I think we complain oftentimes that our gas prices here in Chicago are extremely high compared to other areas. You go to Indiana, for example,
Gasoline.
and the gasoline's
Yeah.
$1 cheaper. There's at least one study that's found that if they build this Keystone pipeline and take more of this Canadian oil to the Gulf Coast, that oddly enough, it will actually drive up the price of gasoline in the Midwest.
It's unambiguously true.
So we could get more pollution, we could get more climate change pollution from refineries in the Midwest that are already refining this oil. We could get more air pollution, we could get more water pollution, and then we could get higher gas prices. That's at least what the research so far says we're going to get.
Have we made you happy? Have
Well,
you?
we do not need to sit back passively as if it's a given that we are dependent in perpetuity upon dirty fossil fuels. We have the opportunity to invest in alternatives. We have the investment creates jobs. It is one of the largest growing parts of the U.S. economy is clean energy. We need to focus on that rather than stay amazed by the blank stare of fossil fuel
right.
industry.
And that's where we're going to have to drop it, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to say, but maybe the next
No
time.
Asian carp?
No Asian carp. We didn't get to Asian carp. We didn't get to the Lindsay
Michael.
Light Company and all
Lindsay
this
Light
stuff.
Company or the
What
Emerald Ash Borer? They're
Emerald
going
Ash-
to tear
we didn't get
my
to-
trees down too.
You know,
It was
that
so
means we're just
framed
going
to
to
begin.
Just means we're going to have another show. And I hope you guys will all come back again. Thank you so much. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. Now, of course, you can see us all the time, but you can also go to iTunes, and you can go to YouTube right here. See this address? And you can watch us any old time you want in the privacy of your own room. I'm Ken Davis saying thanks, or any other place. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks very much for watching us, and we will see you again next week. As we like to say, whether you like it or not, we'll be right back next week. Take it easy. Bye.